The world is changing. Inspiration is everywhere. It has never been so easy to connect, share, and bring people together. We're learning from others and finding the best in ourselves. Challenging our beliefs. Sharing our vulnerability. Overcoming our fears. Transforming ourselves so we can transform the world. How far can we go?
This is London Real. I am Brian Rose. My guest today is... This is London Real. I am Brian Rose. My guest today is Dr. Ben Goertzel, the scientist, futurist, author, and entrepreneur. You are considered one of the world's foremost experts in artificial general intelligence and have submitted over 150 technical papers and published 25 scientific books on the subject. In 2017, you founded Singularity Net with the goal of creating a decentralized, democratic, inclusive, and beneficial artificial general intelligence. Your latest project, Zarka, is a supercharged, intelligent, neurosymbolic large language model at massive scale and promises to take on OpenAI's ChatGPT, but also go much, much further. You believe that your advanced neurosymbolic AI techniques will revolutionize and disrupt every industry, taking a giant step towards artificial general intelligence, or AGI. Ultimately, your goal is to realize a positive and beneficial singularity for the good of all humanity, and that you will build sentient beings of the future to be loving, caring, compassionate, inclusive, and democratic. Ben, welcome back to London Real.
Thanks a lot, Brian. It's a pleasure to be here once more. You know, the world keeps evolving. There keeps being new things to talk about, even in the highly specific domains that I'm working on. So these are amazing times.
Yeah, and we're going to keep having you back because this is moving so fast and growing so exponentially. I think it's important we have these regular conversations. So thanks for coming on. I do want to say before we get started, if anybody wants to learn more about your new project, Zarka, they can go to londonreal.tv/Zarka to request more information. As everyone knows, we will be investing in Zarka through London Real Ventures, and we're super excited to support you on this partnership. Maybe we start off and just say, Ben, what is the current state of the union on large language models, ChatGPT, and maybe then morph into a little bit about how Zarka is going to be different. And then I know we're going to cover a bunch of other topics, but where we are right now in narrow AI, large language models, et cetera.
Yeah, I think the crux of where we are right now with large language models and, large neural models in general is about the same as when we talked last. I mean, our last interview was post GPT-4, right? And I think that while many things have advanced, like we don't have a system generally smarter than GPT-4 yet, right? So what has happened is more and more systems comparable to GPT-4 in various ways are popping up all over. So it's more and more clear that OpenAI's early lead in this domain is not such a big long-term thing, right? So I mean, Google has the successor to Bard by now, so that Google has Palm 2, which is a GPT-4 grade model, and they're already integrating large language models into search, and that's looking like a major disruption to the publishing industry for Google to do that, right? Because if they can summarize what's on everyone's website in a reasonably cogent way, they're keeping you on Google's site with a summary of all the news. You don't need to go to the other websites anymore, right? So it's really, I wouldn't say quite a death blow, but a major blow to many business models on the publishing side, and a very clear revenue model for Google associated with LLMs, right? I'd say probably clearer than what OpenAI has. That at this point. So I'd say Google was caught sort of off guards and taken aback. I would say they've pretty much recovered. On the other hand, you also had this leaked memo from an engineer within Google to the effect, well, we have no moat. Like open source projects can do the same stuff that we're doing, and in some ways they can go faster because they have all sorts of people collaborating and innovating. And this Google engineer who wrote this memo that was released titled "We Have No Moat," right? He was pointing out not just that OpenAI's early lead is meaningless, but that Google's lead also is brittle in the sense that if Google tries to close source their technology, then it will no longer be cutting edge, and open source tech will get smarter and smarter, which ultimately could pose a threat to Google's hegemony on search, even, right? Because I mean, if Google is putting one language model behind search, that's great. It probably can stop the flow of people to Bing, right? On the other hand, if an open source language model was just smarter, then some VCs are going to fund a search engine based on that, which will start eating away at Google, right? So I'd say the tech hasn't advanced a lot since we last talked, but the business aspect has developed significantly, where we're seeing OpenAI doesn't have a unique power here, and big tech companies are probably going to have to keep opening stuff up and play nicely with the open source world in order not to be left behind. Because just as we've seen with other forms of AI technology and with operating systems and other parts of computer tech, even these trillion-dollar companies can't keep up with the open source world, which is just a far larger community collaborating on stuff. So that's interesting. I'd say the public reaction to large language models has evolved since we last talked, right? We had this whole sort of bullshitty kerfuffle where the Future of Life Institute and a bunch of other folks from industry and academia signed a petition suggesting something like pausing development on larger and larger language models for 6 months, which to me, this was an exercise in sort of virtue signaling as a PR stunt or something. Because I mean, everyone knows these big tech companies in the US are not going to pause tech development while China and Russia keep doing tech development, right? And on the other hand, the way that the pause was described lacked any technical nuance. So I mean, it doesn't really mean anything. Pause developing models with more parameters. Okay, but what if instead of a model with 1 trillion parameters, you have a model with 100 million 10-dimensional parameters? What if you have 10 smaller models all talking to each other, right? I mean, it wasn't defined in a meaningful way, and it's very hard to pin down software in a meaningful way and regulate it for similar reasons to why it's hard to pin down software with patents compared to hardware engineering or biotech. There's always multiple ways to skin a cat in software. So I think that, I mean, the pause petition was sort of a PR stunt and a joke, but it also summarized some people's very genuine concerns. And if you look at what they were saying there, it wasn't so much about super AGI annihilating the world, although that's a major concern of many of the signatories. The petition was more about these things are going to spread information and they're going to disrupt the economy by taking people's jobs, right? And I mean, to me, if you're going to ban things because of disinformation, why haven't we banned the internet a long time ago? I mean, the substantial percentage of which is devoted precisely to disinformation designed to brainwash people in the interest of one or another elite party, right? And taking people's jobs, true. Again, why don't we ban the internet? Why don't we ban computers, right? Why don't we ban the fucking factory. I mean, the whole notion makes little sense, and it makes little sense that pausing for 6 months, well, like, what's it going to do? We're gonna figure out how to get rid of misinformation online and how to reform the global economy in 6 months. I mean, I think the reality is society learns how to cope with these big changes by coping with them, right? We don't plan it out in advance. It's not possible to think through these things in advance because of the complexity of the systems involved. And even if you could think through these things in advance, you wouldn't get the policies put into place in advance, because in a democracy and a capitalist system, we always deal with things reactively better than proactively. I mean, unlike mainland China, but that's not what we are here in the West, right? So I think, yeah, the reality is development of these things will not be paused. It's good that people are thinking through the broader implications, and society is going to have to cope with these implications as they unfold. Many elements of society would rather not have to cope with them, but I mean, that's the way things roll. Like, you don't get major, hugely beneficial new innovations in the real world without also having some transitional mayhem to cope with. And I mean, if you have something that uplifts everyone, it's going to alarm some people who previously had a higher status or amount of resources than someone else. I mean, there's going to be a bunch to cope with, right? On the technical level, finally, to wrap up, I think one thing we've seen since our last conversation is an increasing recognition that the shortest path to making large language models that are less full of crap and better grounded in reality will be to hybridize a large language model with a knowledge graph in some form. And, you know, GPT-4 was hybridized with Wolfram Alpha. They're gluing it together with Microsoft Knowledge Graph. But there's all sorts of startups that are doing this in various different ways, right? And I think this is interesting to me because I've been pushing neural symbolic methods where you put a neural net together with a symbolic reasoning engine as a fantastic path to AGI for a long time. Not because it's the only way to get to AGI. I mean, the brain doesn't have a logic engine at the base level, but because I think it's a way to get to AGI that's well suited to the computers we have today, which have logic operations wired into the chips. And also, I think it's a good way to make an AI system that's more rational, reasonable, and sensible than people are. Like, we might be less fucked up if we did have a logic engine at the base level, along with the neural net wiring that we have, right? And so, what's interesting though, by hybridizing a knowledge graph with a neural net in a simple way, you're doing something. But if you really want to kick ass in that way, what you need to do is you need to take that knowledge graph and you need to put logical reasoning on top of it. And big tech is not very well instrumented for that. They just haven't been working on that. And we have been working on that in the OpenCog project, and we've been working on that in SingularityNet, which has done a bunch of work on the OpenCog open source AI project. So we're actually much better prepared to take a large language model, put it together with a knowledge graph, and then do sophisticated logical reasoning on that knowledge graph, and have that logical reasoning sort of coordinate with what happens in the LLM. We're way better prepared to do that than Google or Microsoft or Facebook, just because we've been pushing on the logic side and how you connect that with neural nets for a long time, and they've been ignoring that, right? And that underlies a few different things in SingularityNet ecosystem. So you mentioned the Zarka project. So Zarka is a for-profit spin-off of SingularityNet, which is aimed at the LLM side, right? So make a large language model. I mean, much like Stability and Anthropic and these other open source oriented LLM companies are doing, but use some of OpenCog to connect it with a knowledge graph, right? And use some OpenCog reasoning in that connection, and then roll out something that's like Chat GPT, but multiple times as clever by using neural symbolic AI for smarter thinking, and also running on Singularity Net, NuNet, hypercycle, decentralized backend, right? And then there's another Singularity Net spinoff called True AGI, which is looking at bringing this sort of technology to the enterprise. And there, each enterprise will have its own knowledge base. It has its own knowledge graph, right? So you're looking at like, take the knowledge graph representing what's happening inside a company, do OpenCog reasoning on there, connect that with LLMs, including a general purpose LLM and an LLM fine-tuned on the text from that company, and use that to provide AGI as a service, APIs, running partly on premise, but partly also on our decentralized cloud, right? And the general idea here is like, we can get the world to use decentralized AI networks with no central owner or controller. We have a pretty clear path to doing that over the next couple years. And the path, it's a little bit tricky one, but not that tricky. The path is we provide a better product. Like we make an AI that's multiple times smarter than Chat GPT or than GPT-5 because we know how to do neural symbolic better than anyone else. So everyone wants to use it in retail with Zarka or in enterprise with True AGI. Everyone wants to use it because it's good. Lo and behold, it happens to run on this decentralized back end. And just like people will use Stable Diffusion because it's good, they don't mind that it's open source. They're not necessarily using it because it's open source. Similarly, they will use Zarka and True AGI stuff because it's the best, not because it's running on decentralized infrastructure in most cases, unless folks are decentralization zealots like you and me. But people don't mind if it's running on a decentralized backend as long as it works, right? And having done this, then having this neural symbolic thing there, then we're prepared to solve the next problem, which is fundamental creativity and invention. Because until you can use logic to filter out what's bullshit and what's not, then you can't let your freak flag fly and just like invent wild new things. Because to invent wild new things without a filter, you'll just do insanity. You won't do meaningful creation, right? So once you have the logic to ground a system's productions in reality, you can then integrate evolutionary AI, concept blending, other cool AI methods to boost up the inventive capability of large language models and other AI systems using the grounding in logic to filter out what's good in a certain context and what isn't. So I think it's funny because in a way, you would think big tech has a big lead, but actually, when you analyze step by step, you see, well, wait a minute, actually everything they do will be replicated within 6 months in the open source world. And also they're hitting brick walls that they need to work around by integrating neural with symbolic AI. And they're not good at symbolic AI because they haven't built those teams, right? So their positions are not as ironclad as you would think. And they know this very well, although the average outside observers don't know it. So I think we're entering into a super interesting time, and we can then cross-correlate this with all the socioeconomic implication stuff that we talked about in our last discussion, which I thought about a bit on a recent trip to Brazil, because I was at the Web Summit Brazil. It was great. I was born in Brazil. I'm a dual citizen, U.S. and Brazil, so there's some connection there. I'd thought a lot before about what all this means for sub-Saharan Africa, because we have an office in Ethiopia. I've done a lot of work there. Brazil is in a different case, right? It's not that poor, but it's not rich enough to give universal basic income to every citizen. So thinking through what all this means for each different sort of socioeconomic stratum on the globe remains quite complicated. And really the difference there from when we last talked is now every fucking country is thinking about this, right? Like the leader of Brazil is thinking about this. I mean, even people who have no knowledge of tech and no interest in tech, no, they have to be thinking about it. And that doesn't mean they'll think about it productively or intelligently or come to the right conclusion. But it's interesting, like how much that's out there. We met loads of Brazilian parliament members at Web Summit Rio, and all their thinking is like, what do we do to deal with the onrush of AI?
And so what do you tell them, Ben?
I tell them you're screwed. Yeah. No, I mean, what I told them is, first of all, what we just discussed, that I think decentralized approaches to AGI have more chance than it would naively seem at first. And that's very good for the developing world, because it means that Brazil really can own their fair share of the emerging global AI network, right? And it doesn't have to be something owned by US or China, and Brazil just uses it or is used by it, right? If it's deployed in a decentralized way and owned in a decentralized way and developed in an open way, Brazil has brilliant computer scientists, a very active entrepreneurial ecosystem, like they can contribute. There's a huge dam on the border of Brazil and Paraguay generating massive amounts of electricity. We've actually been talking to the government on the Paraguay side about building a huge data center there, running a bunch of machines powered by Hypercycle, NewNet, SingularityNet, running AI servers, running Zarka and true AGI processes, right? So, I mean, they've got electricity there. They have computer science knowledge there. Like they can own part of this too, and they should, and then they will have a practical vote, right? Because when I say this is going to be democratic, I don't really mean it's going to be like everyone in the world goes and votes in a poll, like what does the AI think next? I mean, you might have some DAOs and some voting. We're transforming SingularityNet Foundation into a DAO with more explicit voting and governance, but much of the democracy here is of a more loose and self-organized kind. Like if you have big server farms in Brazil and Paraguay that are running gigawatts of electricity to power nodes powering the global AGI brain, I mean, then in effect, Brazil and Paraguay have a big vote, right? It's running on their soil. It's their own developers contributing to it, right? So obviously they like this part of the story. I think the tokenomic bit they're open to, but crypto is still a little more dubious in Brazil, right? But and they like to control money flow of real and so forth. So because I think another piece of this is once you have AGI rolled out on a decentralized platform, then you have a beautiful context for tokenomic incentivization mechanisms to be used to pay people who contribute. That doesn't fully solve the economic issues involved, but it at least gives more of a global level playing field, right? So the people who fundamentally have the knowledge to contribute to the economy can do it without being screwed up by, arbitrary national boundaries and conventional corporate structures and so forth. And Brazilian law places many weird obstacles in the way of a shift to sort of a global, sort of tokenomically incentivized economy. How quickly they can adapt that to who knows, right? I mean, one thing you could see happening, which you might.
To continue watching the rest of the episode for free, visit our website londonreal.tv or click the link in the description below.